Welcome to Spiritual Walk. Before we begin, take a moment to slow down. Put aside whatever happened today. Let the noise of the outside world become a little quieter. Because this journey is not simply about learning shapes, numbers, or mathematical patterns. It is about learning to see. In this video, we are going to explore one of the most fascinating ideas found at the intersection of nature, mathematics, philosophy, and spirituality. The patterns that appear again and again throughout the natural world. We will discover spirals hidden inside flowers and shells. We will explore the Fibonacci sequence and the mathematical relationships that can emerge in plants. We will look at symmetry in snowflakes, the remarkable efficiency of honeycombs, the branching patterns of trees and rivers, and the repeating structures known as fractals. But this journey is not about memorizing formulas. It is about developing a different way of looking at the world. By the end, I hope you will begin noticing patterns that were always around you, but perhaps never truly seen. And there will be a small practice for you along the way, something simple, something you can do outside, without technology, without special knowledge, and without spending anything. Because sometimes, the most profound discoveries begin when we simply stop and look. So take a breath. Become curious, and for the next few minutes, let us step away from the noise of everyday life and enter the hidden geometry of nature. The sacred geometry of nature. Chapter 1. The language hidden in plain sight. Close your eyes for a moment. Take one slow breath, and imagine standing alone in a quiet forest just before sunrise. The air is cool, the world is still. The first light of morning slips gently through the trees, painting the ground in shades of gold. Nothing is asking for your attention. No notifications, no deadlines, no endless stream of voices competing for a place in your mind. Only silence. Now, open your eyes. Look carefully at the world around you. Not with the eyes of someone rushing to the next task, but with the quiet curiosity of a child seeing the world for the very first time. A single leaf, a flower opening toward the sun, the spiral of a shell resting on a beach, the branches of an ancient tree stretching toward the sky, the curve of a wave before it breaks, the stars scattered across the night. At first they appear unrelated, different shapes, different places, different stories. But what if they are not as different as they seem? What if nature has been repeating the same ideas again and again and again, not by accident, but through patterns so ancient that they existed long before the first human ever looked at the sky? Have you ever wondered why a sunflower arranges its seeds the way it does? Why snowflakes form with remarkable symmetry? Why rivers branch like trees? And trees branch like the veins inside your own body? Why hurricanes spiral? Why galaxies spiral? Why seashells spiral? Why life seems to echo itself from the smallest scale to the largest? Is it merely coincidence? Or is there an underlying order hidden beneath what appears to be chaos? For thousands of years, philosophers, mathematicians, artists, architects, and spiritual seekers have asked these same questions. Some believe these patterns reflected the mathematical beauty of nature. Others saw them as symbols of harmony and interconnectedness. Today, science continues to uncover remarkable regularities in the natural world, while many spiritual traditions continue to find inspiration in those same forms. Perhaps the most beautiful part is that you do not need to choose one perspective over the other. Whether you see mathematics, creation, or simply the astonishing creativity of nature, the invitation is the same. Look closer, because the more carefully we observe, the more extraordinary, ordinary things become. Think about your own heartbeat. You have heard it every day of your life, yet how often do you truly stop to appreciate it? Or your breathing, so constant, so familiar, that it almost disappears from your awareness. The greatest wonders are often hidden, not because they are difficult to find, but because they have become too familiar to notice. Nature works in much the same way. Its greatest masterpieces are not locked away inside museums. They bloom beside quiet roads. They drift through the night sky. They fall gently as snow. They hide inside every flower, every tree, every cloud, and every living cell. We simply stopped looking. Modern life moves quickly. It teaches us efficiency, productivity, speed. We learn how to measure, how to calculate, how to consume. But somewhere along the way, many of us forget how to observe. Observation is different from looking. Looking lasts only a moment. Observation asks for your presence. Imagine two people standing before the same mountain. One takes a photograph and walks away. The other remains for an hour, watching how the light changes, listening to the wind, noticing shadows slowly move across the rocks. Both saw the mountain. Only one experienced it. Sacred geometry begins in exactly the same place, not with belief, not with complex mathematics, but with attention. Because attention changes everything. The moment we slow down, patterns begin to emerge. The branch of a tree no longer appears random. The petals of a flower seem almost perfectly arranged. The ripples across water begin to resemble circles, expanding without end. Questions quietly begin to appear. Why this shape? Why this rhythm? Why this remarkable sense of order? Scientists have spent centuries exploring these questions through mathematics, biology, chemistry, and physics. Their discoveries reveal that many natural patterns arise because generations of artists, stable, architects, or shaped by the laws of the physical world. Teachers have looked at these very same patterns and seen something deeply meaningful. Not proof of a particular belief, but an invitation to wonder. Wonder is a rare thing. Children possess it naturally. Adults often trade it for certainty. Yet perhaps certainty is not always the highest form of understanding. Perhaps wonder keeps the mind open, and an open mind continues learning. As you listen today, I invite you to become an observer. You do not need to agree with every idea. You do not need to reach any final conclusion. Simply notice. Notice what resonates. Notice what surprises you. Notice the quiet questions that begin to arise within your own mind. Because this journey is not about convincing you of anything. It is about rediscovering a way of seeing that transforms an ordinary flower into a masterpiece, a seashell into a lesson, a river into a story, and the night sky into a reminder that we are part of something far greater than ourselves. In the next chapter, we begin with one of nature's most fascinating mysteries, a simple sequence of numbers, discovered centuries ago, that quietly appears in flowers, pine cones, sunflowers, and even the graceful spirals of certain galaxies. A pattern so simple that a child can understand it, yet so profound that it continues to inspire scientists, artists, and philosophers to this day. The sacred geometry of nature. Chapter 2. The numbers that bloom. Imagine holding a tiny sunflower in your hands. At first glance, it is simply beautiful. Golden petals, a dark center, countless tiny seeds packed together so perfectly that they almost seem arranged by an artist with infinite patience. But look closer. Those seeds do not grow randomly. They follow spirals. Not one spiral, many. Some curve gently to the left, others curve to the right. Together, they create a pattern so efficient that almost every seed finds its own space. No arguments, no wasted room, no confusion, just quiet order. Now imagine walking through a forest. You pick up a pine cone. Its scales follow similar spirals. Later, you cut open a pineapple. Again, spirals. Then you notice the petals of a daisy, the arrangement of leaves around a stem, the unfolding of a fern. The same quiet rhythm appears again and again. Different plants, different climates, different continents, yet remarkably similar patterns. Why? For centuries, people wondered if nature was following some hidden design. Then, in the Middle Ages, an Italian mathematician described a simple sequence of numbers that would later become famous around the world. It begins like this: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. Each number is created by adding the 2 before it. A pattern so simple that a child can understand it in a few moments. Yet this humble sequence appears surprisingly often in the natural world. Not because nature sits down to do mathematics, but because similar mathematical relationships can emerge through natural growth and efficient packing. Think of a young plant reaching toward the sunlight. Every new leaf needs room to receive light. If all the leaves grew directly on top of one another, many would remain trapped in shadow. Instead, many plants develop arrangements that help distribute sunlight more effectively. Over millions of years, natural processes favored patterns that worked well. The result is a quiet elegance that feels almost intentional. Nature wastes very little. It does not seek perfection. It seeks balance. And balance often appears beautiful to the human eye. Perhaps that is why we pause when we see a sunflower, or a spiral shell resting on the shore. Something within us recognizes the harmony, even if we cannot explain it. Have you ever watched a fern slowly unfold? It begins as a tightly curled spiral. Day by day, it opens with remarkable grace. No rushing, no hesitation, no fear of becoming what it was meant to be. The fern never compares itself to the oak beside it. The oak never envies the flower beneath its branches. Nature has no interest in competition, only growth. Perhaps that is a lesson we have forgotten. So much of modern life is built upon comparison. Who has more? Who achieves success first? Who looks happier? Who appears stronger? But when was the last time you saw two mountains competing, or two rivers trying to outshine one another? The forest thrives because every tree grows according to its own nature, not because every tree becomes identical. There is wisdom in that. The patterns of nature remind us that harmony does not require sameness. It requires each part to fulfill its own role. A single note cannot create a symphony, yet without that one note, the music changes forever. You are part of that music. Just as every leaf contributes to the tree, every star contributes to the night sky, every wave contributes to the ocean, each life quietly contributes to the greater story of humanity. Perhaps we underestimate the importance of ordinary things. A single seed appears insignificant, yet within it rests the blueprint for an entire forest. A single drop of rain seems powerless, yet enough drops can carve valleys through solid rock. Transformation often begins with what appears too small to matter. This truth extends beyond nature. It reaches into our own lives. A single act of kindness, one moment of forgiveness, one honest conversation, one quiet morning spent in reflection. These moments may seem small, but they shape the direction of a life, just as tiny patterns shape the growth of a flower. Sometimes we imagine that change must arrive dramatically, a life-changing event, a sudden revelation, a perfect opportunity. Yet nature tells a different story. The tallest tree did not grow in a single season. The deepest canyon was not carved in a day. The brightest stars were not born in an instant. Everything meaningful unfolds through patient rhythm. Perhaps we should be kinder to ourselves when our own growth feels slow. Not everything beautiful blooms quickly. There is another reason these patterns continue to fascinate us. They remind us that complexity can emerge from simplicity. An entire forest begins with a seed. A magnificent spiral begins with a simple curve. A breathtaking galaxy forms through physical processes unfolding over immense spans of time. Simple beginnings, extraordinary outcomes. This is one of nature's quietest lessons. Do not underestimate small beginnings. Many of the greatest transformations begin invisibly, beneath the soil, beneath the surface of the water, beneath the surface of the mind. Perhaps your own life is unfolding in ways you cannot yet see. Perhaps roots are growing where you see only emptiness. Perhaps patience is preparing you for something that rushing never could. Nature never apologizes for growing slowly. It understands that strength takes time. And maybe, so do we. Now let me invite you to try something. Not tomorrow, Not next week, right now. Take a slow breath. As you exhale, look around the room you're in. Notice the shapes, the curves, the circles, the lines. Now imagine stepping outside later today. Find the nearest tree, or a flower, or even a blade of grass pushing through a crack in the pavement. Do not name it. Do not photograph it. Simply observe. Ask yourself one question. If I had never seen this before, what would I notice? Stay with that question for a full minute. You may be surprised by what appears when your mind stops rushing to provide answers. Observation is a skill. Wonder is a practice, and both grow stronger the more we use them. Because the greatest mystery is not that nature contains beautiful patterns. The greatest mystery is how often we walk past them without ever truly seeing them. But spirals are only the beginning. There is another shape that appears so frequently in nature that it has become a symbol of efficiency itself. It can be found inside honeycombs, hidden within snowflakes, deep inside crystals, and even in the microscopic structures of the natural world. A shape with 6 equal sides, simple, elegant, and astonishingly powerful. Let's explore why the universe seems to love the hexagon. Why does nature seem to love the hexagon? Look at a honeycomb. Thousands of tiny cells fit together with almost impossible precision. 6 sides, 6 corners, one repeating pattern. And yet there is no architect standing over the bees with a ruler, no engineer drawing blueprints, no mathematician calculating every angle. The structure emerges from simple biological behavior and the physical properties of wax. And that is what makes it so fascinating. The hexagon is remarkably efficient at filling space. Imagine trying to cover a floor using circles. You would quickly notice the problem. Gaps appear between them. Now imagine using squares. The gaps disappear, but the structure becomes rigid and less efficient in certain packing situations. With hexagons, something remarkable happens. They fit together tightly, creating a repeating structure with no wasted space. This is one reason the honeycomb has become such a powerful symbol of natural efficiency. Every cell contributes to the whole. Every wall serves a purpose. Nothing exists simply for decoration. And perhaps there is a lesson here for us. We often believe that a meaningful life requires adding more. More possessions, more achievements, more information, more experiences. But nature often achieves extraordinary results through efficiency. It uses what is necessary. It adapts. It removes what is unnecessary. A tree does not grow every possible branch. A flower does not produce infinite petals. Nature is constantly negotiating between growth, energy, space, and survival. Beauty emerges from that balance, and maybe our own lives could benefit from the same principle. What if a peaceful life is not about adding more things to our days, but removing what no longer belongs? What if simplicity is not emptiness, but efficiency of the soul? The honeycomb gives us another reason to look differently at the natural world. A pattern can be beautiful and practical at the same time. And that idea becomes even more fascinating when we leave the warm world of the hive and enter a place where geometry seems almost magical. A place where every tiny crystal can become a completely unique work of art. The frozen world of the snowflake. Imagine a single snowflake falling silently through the night. It begins high above the ground, inside a cloud, where tiny water molecules encounter freezing temperatures. Slowly, a crystal begins to form. As it grows, its molecular structure creates a remarkable 6-fold symmetry. 6 arms, 6 directions, one underlying geometry. And yet, no 2 snowflakes are exactly alike. Think about that. The same basic physical principles, producing an endless variety of forms. This is one of nature's most beautiful paradoxes. Order does not have to create sameness. A pattern can exist while individuality remains. Every snowflake follows the same fundamental rules, and yet each one develops its own tiny differences along the way. Temperature changes, humidity changes, air currents change. The journey through the atmosphere is never exactly the same, so the final shape becomes unique. There is something deeply human in that. We are shaped by patterns too. Our families, our cultures, our experiences, our environment, the things we were taught, the things we suffered, the people we loved. All of these leave their marks on us. And yet, no two human lives unfold in exactly the same way. We share a common structure, but our stories become our own. Perhaps this is one of the quiet lessons hidden within geometry. You do not need to become completely different from everyone else to be unique. You can belong to a greater pattern and still have your own shape. Look again at the snowflake. Its symmetry is not perfect in the way a machine might produce it. Tiny imperfections appear everywhere, and those imperfections are part of its beauty. We often spend our lives trying to remove every flaw. We hide mistakes. We hide uncertainty. We hide the parts of ourselves that don't fit the image we want others to see. But nature does not seem embarrassed by imperfection. The tree grows crooked branches. The stone develops cracks. The leaf becomes damaged. The mountain erodes. And somehow, the whole remains beautiful. Maybe perfection was never the goal. Maybe participation in the larger pattern was. And if that is true, perhaps we can stop demanding perfection from ourselves. Perhaps we can simply keep growing, keep learning, keep becoming, just as nature does. But there is another pattern even more widespread than the hexagon. You have seen it without realizing it. In trees, in rivers, in lightning, in your own body, and even in the structure of some of the largest systems in the universe. It is the pattern of branching. And once you notice it, you will begin seeing it everywhere. Look at the branches of a tree. A thick trunk rises from the ground. Then it divides. One branch becomes two. Those branches divide again. And again, smaller branches emerge from larger ones, until eventually they become tiny twigs reaching toward the sky. Now look at a river from above. A large river moves through the landscape. Then it divides into smaller streams. Those streams divide again. The pattern continues until tiny channels spread across the land. Now look inside your own body. Your lungs contain branching airways. Your blood vessels branch throughout your body. Even the nervous system develops through intricate networks of branching pathways. Different things, different purposes, different scales, and yet the same basic idea appears again and again. Branching. Why? Because branching is an efficient way of distributing something across space. A tree needs to move water and nutrients from its roots toward countless leaves. A river distributes water across a landscape. Your lungs need to bring oxygen deep into your body. Your blood vessels need to deliver oxygen and nutrients to cells. The physical problem is different, but the solution can look surprisingly similar. This is one of the most fascinating things about nature. Similar problems can produce similar forms. Nature doesn't need to copy itself. The laws of physics and biology can naturally lead different systems toward related patterns. And this brings us to one of the most misunderstood ideas in sacred geometry. When people see the same shape appearing in a tree, a river, a cloud, and a galaxy, it can be tempting to conclude that all of them must have been created by exactly the same hidden force. But the scientific explanation can be more subtle, and perhaps even more fascinating. Similar patterns can emerge because similar mathematical principles operate in completely different environments. Order can emerge from simple rules. Complexity can emerge without a central designer. And beauty can emerge without anyone consciously creating it. Think about a flock of birds. No single bird controls the entire flock. Yet hundreds of birds can suddenly turn together, creating a fluid shape that seems almost choreographed. Each bird follows relatively simple rules. Stay near the others, avoid collisions, adjust direction, respond to movement. And from those simple interactions, something complex emerges. A pattern larger than any individual bird. Nature is filled with these kinds of emergent patterns. They remind us that complexity does not always require complexity at the beginning. Sometimes, extraordinary things emerge from very simple rules, repeated again and again. And perhaps that is one of the deepest ideas we can take from nature. Do not underestimate simple actions. A small habit repeated every day can transform a life. A single thought repeated often can become a belief. A belief repeated long enough can become part of an identity. Just as a tiny branch repeated across a tree can eventually create an entire canopy, our small choices create the structure of our lives. We rarely notice the pattern while it is forming. We notice it later, when we finally step back and see the whole. So perhaps the question is not only, what patterns exist in nature? Perhaps we should also ask, what patterns are forming within me? Take a moment with that question. What patterns are forming within you? Not the dramatic events, not the major decisions, the small things. What do you do when you wake up? What do you repeatedly think about? What do you tell yourself when something goes wrong? How do you speak to the people around you? How do you speak to yourself? These small actions may appear insignificant, but repeated patterns have power. A river does not carve a canyon with one drop of water. A mountain does not erode because of one moment of wind. A forest does not appear because of one seed. Transformation is usually cumulative. It happens quietly, one repetition at a time. This is why nature can become a mirror. When we observe it carefully, we begin seeing principles that also exist within our own lives. Growth takes time. Balance matters. Small actions accumulate. Adaptation is necessary. And nothing remains exactly the same forever. Even mountains change. Even oceans change. Even stars are born and eventually disappear. The universe is not static. It is movement, transformation, relationship, change. And perhaps our suffering often begins when we demand that life remain still. We want people to remain who they were. We want relationships to remain unchanged. We want our bodies to remain young. We want successful moments to last forever. We want painful moments to disappear immediately. But nature does not operate that way. Everything moves. Everything changes. Everything participates in cycles. The flower opens, then closes. The tide rises, then falls. The sun appears, then disappears. The moon grows, then fades. And somehow we call this beautiful. Why do we accept impermanence in nature, but resist it in ourselves? Maybe because we have forgotten that we are nature too. We often speak about nature as though it exists somewhere outside of us. The forest over there, the ocean over there, the mountains over there, and us, here. But that separation is an illusion. The oxygen entering your lungs was produced by living systems. The water you drink has traveled through rivers, clouds, soil, plants, and oceans. The minerals inside your body came from the earth. The elements that make up your body were forged through ancient cosmic processes. You are not standing outside nature. You are participating in it. You are nature, becoming aware of itself. And perhaps that is why these patterns affect us so deeply. When we look at a spiral, something feels familiar. When we watch waves, we feel calm. When we walk through a forest, our minds often become quieter. When we look at the stars, our sense of self seems to become smaller. Maybe these experiences remind us of something we already know, but have forgotten. We belong to something larger, not because we are insignificant, but because we are connected. And once you begin seeing nature this way, sacred geometry becomes less about mysterious shapes and more about relationship. The relationship between parts and wholes, between simplicity and complexity, between order and change, between you and the world around you. Chapter 4. When Geometry Became Sacred. Long before we had computers, before telescopes could reveal distant galaxies, before microscopes allowed us to see the hidden structures of life, human beings were already looking at patterns. They watched the movement of the stars. They observed the changing seasons. They measured shadows. They built structures according to proportion. And slowly, they began to recognize something. The world around them appeared to have order. This realization changed the way humans understood existence. Geometry was no longer simply a practical tool. It became a language through which people expressed ideas about harmony, balance, proportion, and the relationship between humanity and the cosmos. In ancient Egypt, geometry was essential for surveying land, constructing monumental architecture, and organizing space. In ancient Greece, mathematicians explored the relationships between numbers, shapes, proportions, and harmony. Pythagoras and his followers became particularly interested in the relationship between mathematics and music. They discovered that musical harmony could be expressed through mathematical ratios. A simple relationship between numbers could create something deeply emotional. A sound could be measured, yet still move the human heart. That must have been astonishing. It suggested that mathematics was not merely something humans invented to count objects. Perhaps mathematics could also describe relationships hidden within reality itself. The Greeks also became fascinated by geometric forms: the circle, the triangle, the square, the five-pointed form, the five regular polyhedra that later became known as the Platonic solids. These shapes were associated with philosophical ideas about order and the structure of the physical world. But we should be careful here. Modern discussions about sacred geometry sometimes make ancient civilizations sound as though they possessed secret scientific knowledge that has been lost. The historical reality is more complicated. Ancient people were brilliant observers. They developed sophisticated mathematics, astronomy, architecture, and engineering. But they did not necessarily understand nature in the same way modern science does. Their interpretations were shaped by the cultures and philosophies of their time. And that distinction matters, because we don't need to invent secret knowledge to appreciate what they actually discovered. Their genuine achievements are extraordinary enough. They realize that proportion affects beauty, that symmetry creates balance, that repeated patterns can organize enormous structures, and that mathematics can describe relationships that appear far beyond human imagination. Across different civilizations, geometric forms also became symbols. A circle could represent wholeness. A spiral could suggest growth or transformation. A symmetrical design could represent balance. These meanings were not universal laws. They varied between cultures. But humans repeatedly used geometry to express something that words sometimes struggle to communicate: order, harmony, infinity, connection. Perhaps that is why geometry became sacred, not because shapes themselves were magical, but because humans looked at the order of the universe and felt wonder. And when wonder becomes deep enough, it often becomes spiritual. Think about the circle. There is no obvious beginning, no obvious ending. You can follow its curve forever and eventually return to where you started. Perhaps that is why circles appear so often in human symbolism. The sun, the moon, the wheel, the cycle of seasons, birth, death, renewal. The circle became a natural symbol for continuity. Then there is the spiral. Unlike the circle, the spiral does not simply return to the same point. It moves outward or inward. It suggests movement, growth, transformation, a journey, and once again, we find the same form in nature: a shell, a fern, a storm, a galaxy. The mathematical details behind each spiral can be very different. A seashell is not literally a miniature galaxy. A hurricane is not simply a giant flower. The mechanisms are different, but the visual resemblance can still provoke a powerful human response. And perhaps that response is what makes geometry sacred. Not the claim that every spiral has the same supernatural meaning, but the feeling that emerges when we recognize a pattern connecting things that seem completely unrelated. This brings us to an important question. Why are human beings so attracted to symmetry? Why does a balanced face often appear beautiful? Why do symmetrical buildings feel ordered? Why do repeating patterns make us feel calm? Part of the answer may be deeply rooted in perception. Our brains are pattern recognition systems. We constantly search for regularity. It helps us understand the environment. It helps us predict what might happen next. A sudden change in a familiar pattern can immediately capture our attention. And when we encounter a stable pattern, the mind can experience a sense of order. Perhaps this is one reason geometric art can feel so meditative. The eye knows where to travel. The pattern repeats. The mind follows. And for a moment, the endless stream of thoughts becomes quieter. This may also explain why mandalas have been used as contemplative objects in certain traditions. A mandala is not simply decoration. In Buddhist and Hindu traditions, mandalas can serve as symbolic representations of a structured cosmos and can be used within spiritual practices. The geometric arrangement gives the mind something to focus upon: a center, a boundary, a repeating structure, a visual journey from complexity towards stillness. And that idea connects beautifully with what we have been exploring, because perhaps the deepest purpose of a pattern is not to tell us what to believe, but to teach us how to pay attention. A mandala can be observed, a flower can be observed, a snowflake can be observed, a galaxy can be observed. And in each case, the act of observing can become a form of meditation. You stop rushing, you stop demanding, you simply look. And sometimes, when we look deeply enough, the boundary between science and wonder becomes very thin. But there is another reason this subject continues to fascinate people. Geometry gives us a way to imagine the invisible. We cannot see gravity directly, but we can see what gravity does. We cannot see time, but we can observe change. We cannot see mathematical laws floating through space, but we can see patterns that mathematics describes. The invisible becomes visible through its effects. And perhaps spirituality has always faced a similar challenge. How do you describe something that cannot easily be measured? Something experienced internally rather than observed externally. Different traditions develop different languages for this. Some used stories, some used music, some used meditation, some used architecture, some used geometric symbols. The symbol became a bridge between the visible and the invisible, a way to point toward an idea without claiming that the symbol itself was the idea. That distinction is important. A map is not the territory. A symbol is not the reality it represents. A drawing of a circle is not infinity. A mandala is not the universe. A mathematical equation is not nature itself. They are ways of describing relationships, ways of pointing, ways of helping the human mind approach something larger than itself. And perhaps this is why sacred geometry has survived for so long. Because human beings have always wanted to understand their place in the larger pattern. Where do we belong? Why are we here? Is there order beneath apparent chaos? Are we separate from nature or part of it? These questions have no simple answers, and perhaps they are not supposed to. Some questions are valuable precisely because they remain open. They keep us curious. They keep us humble. They remind us that reality is larger than our current understanding. So when you hear the phrase sacred geometry, you do not have to imagine secret codes hidden inside every flower. You can simply see it as an invitation to notice the extraordinary order, repetition, symmetry, proportion, and mathematical structure that nature sometimes produces, and then to ask what that beauty means to you. Because perhaps the meaning is not contained entirely inside the pattern. Perhaps part of the meaning is created by the person who observes it. A flower does not need to know that it is beautiful. A galaxy does not need an audience. A snowflake does not need to understand its symmetry. Nature simply unfolds, and we are the ones who stop, look, and wonder. That act of wonder may be one of the most human things we possess. And now, we have reached the point where we can stop looking outward. Because after exploring flowers, snowflakes, trees, rivers, temples, and galaxies, there is one final pattern we need to examine: the pattern within ourselves. And this is where the journey becomes personal, because perhaps the most important geometry you will ever discover is not hidden inside a flower or written across the stars. Perhaps it is hidden inside the way you live your own life. Chapter 5. The Pattern Within You. We have spent this journey looking outward, at flowers, at shells, at trees, at rivers, at snowflakes, at stars. We search for patterns hidden in the world around us. But now, turn your attention inward, because there is another kind of geometry, a geometry that cannot be measured with a ruler. It is the pattern of your life. Think about your days. Most of us imagine that our lives are shaped by major decisions: the university we choose, the job we accept, the person we marry, the city where we live, pathetic opportunities we take. And yes, those moments matter. But beneath them are thousands of smaller choices. What you think about when you wake up, what you do when you are afraid, how you respond when someone hurts you, what you repeatedly tell yourself, what you choose to consume, what you choose to ignore, what you practice again and again and again and again. These repetitions become patterns, and patterns eventually become a life. Think about a river. A river does not decide one morning to create a canyon. It simply continues flowing, day after day, year after year, century after century. The movement seems insignificant in a single moment, but accumulated over time, the effect becomes enormous. Your habits work the same way. One evening spent scrolling may seem meaningless. One angry reaction may seem insignificant. One act of kindness may seem too small to matter. But repetition changes everything. The direction of your life is often hidden inside the things you repeatedly do. This is where the geometry of nature becomes a mirror. A tree grows through repeated structures. A river shapes the landscape through repeated movement. A spiral forms through a continuing process. And a human life develops through repeated choices. We are constantly creating patterns. The question is, are we creating them consciously, or are we simply repeating whatever has become familiar? Sometimes familiarity feels like truth, but something being familiar does not mean it is healthy. You may have become accustomed to worrying, accustomed to rushing, accustomed to criticizing yourself, accustomed to saying yes when you mean no, accustomed to carrying guilt from the past. Because you have repeated something for years, it can begin to feel like part of your identity. But a pattern can be changed. A river can change its course. A forest can grow again after a fire. A damaged ecosystem can recover. Pathetic human mind also possesses an extraordinary capacity for change. And change does not always begin with a dramatic decision. Sometimes it begins with awareness. You notice the pattern. You pause, and instead of automatically repeating it, you choose differently. That small space between impulse and action is incredibly powerful. It is where conscious living begins. Imagine someone says something that hurts you. Your first reaction is anger. You want to respond immediately, to defend yourself, to attack back. But then, you pause. 1 breath, 2 seconds, and you ask yourself, do I really want to continue this pattern? That question creates space. Maybe you still respond. Maybe you walk away. Maybe you speak calmly. The situation has not changed, but you have. And sometimes that is enough to change everything that follows. This is why stillness matters. Stillness creates space, and space creates choice. Without space, we react. With space, we can respond. Perhaps that is one of the most practical lessons hidden within all of this beautiful geometry. Nature does not waste movement. and neither should we. Not every thought deserves our attention. Not every argument deserves our energy. Not every opportunity deserves our time. Not every fear deserves to become a decision. A meaningful life requires selection. Just as nature selects patterns that work, we must learn which patterns deserve to continue within us. Now, I want you to try something. This is the practice I promised you earlier. You do not need special equipment. You do not need a meditation app. You do not need to understand mathematics. You only need 5 quiet minutes. Tomorrow, nor whenever you have a peaceful moment, go outside. Find something from nature, a leaf, a flower, a tree, a stone, a shell, even a small patch of grass. Choose something ordinary, something you would normally walk past without thinking. Then sit with it. For 5 minutes, do nothing else. Do not take a photograph. Do not search for its name. Do not look it up online. Do not try to make a clever observation. Simply look. Start with the obvious. What shapes do you see? Are there curves, lines, repeating forms, symmetry, branches, spirals? Then look more closely. Where is the object imperfect? Where does the pattern change? Where does something unexpected appear? And finally, ask yourself one question. What can I learn from this without forcing it to teach me anything? Then remain silent. Let the question sit. Maybe nothing happens. That is perfectly fine. The purpose is not to receive some supernatural message. The purpose is to practice attention, because attention changes perception. When we stop rushing, the ordinary becomes detailed. When we become detailed, the ordinary becomes fascinating. And when something becomes fascinating, we naturally begin caring about it. This simple practice can also become a mirror for your inner life. After observing the object, close your eyes. Take a slow breath. Ask yourself, what pattern in my own life am I repeatedly creating? Maybe it is a pattern of rushing, maybe avoidance, maybe comparison, maybe kindness, maybe patience. There is no need to judge the answer, just notice it. Awareness comes before transformation. You cannot change a pattern you cannot see, and you cannot see a pattern clearly while constantly running away from yourself. That is why silence matters. Silence gives patterns somewhere to appear. When the world becomes quiet, your inner habits become easier to notice. You hear the thoughts you normally cover with noise. You notice the emotions you normally suppress. You recognize the questions you have been avoiding. This can feel uncomfortable, but discomfort is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it is simply the feeling of becoming aware. A room can look perfectly clean in bright sunlight until you open the curtains. Suddenly you notice the dust. The sunlight did not create the dust, it revealed it. Awareness works the same way. It does not create your inner patterns, it reveals them. And once something is visible, you finally have the freedom to choose what happens next. There is another pattern we should talk about, the pattern of seasons. Spring arrives, life begins to emerge. Summer expands, autumn releases, winter becomes quiet. Then the cycle begins again. Imagine if nature resisted every season. Imagine a tree refusing to let its leaves fall because it believed losing them meant failure. Imagine a flower refusing to close because it was afraid of darkness. Imagine the ocean refusing to retreat because it believed every wave had to remain forever. Nature does not think this way. It allows change. And perhaps this is one of the most difficult lessons for human beings. We often want the good moments to stay and the painful moments to disappear. We cling to relationships after they have changed. We cling to identities we have outgrown. We cling to achievements from the past. We even cling to versions of ourselves that no longer exist. But life keeps moving. The geometry of existence is not a perfect circle that simply repeats the same point. It is more like a spiral. We return to familiar themes, but never in exactly the same place. You may face a lesson again, but you are not the same person who faced it before. You may experience heartbreak again, but you understand yourself differently. You may return to an old dream, but with new wisdom. The pattern repeats while you evolve. And perhaps this is what growth really means. Not escaping every difficult experience, but moving through familiar patterns with increasing awareness. A spiral can return near where it began without actually becoming the same. Maybe our lives are like that. We revisit, we learn, we release, we return, we grow. And eventually, we understand that the journey was never about reaching some perfect, final version of ourselves. It was about becoming more conscious of the pattern as we move through it. So the next time life feels repetitive, do not immediately assume you are stuck. Ask a different question. What is this moment trying to show me that I could not see before? Maybe the situation has returned because you are finally ready to see it differently. Maybe the pattern is not punishment. Maybe it is an invitation to respond differently, to forgive, to let go, to begin again, to choose a new direction. Nature gives us permission to begin again constantly. Every morning, the light returns. Every spring, new leaves appear. After a forest fire, life can slowly return. The world is filled with beginnings that emerge from endings. So if you are currently standing inside an ending, remember, you may simply be standing at the beginning of another pattern. You cannot always see what comes next, and that is okay. A seed does not know what the tree will look like. It only knows how to begin. Sometimes that is all we need to know. Perhaps this is where sacred geometry becomes most meaningful. Not when we look at a perfect mathematical shape, but when we recognize that life itself is filled with relationships. Nothing exists completely alone. The flower depends on the soil. The soil depends on countless organisms. The organisms depend on water. The water moves through clouds, rivers, oceans, and living bodies. The tree produces oxygen. We breathe it. We return carbon dioxide. The tree uses it. A continuous exchange, happening quietly around us every moment. We are participants in a vast network of relationships. And perhaps the feeling of separation comes partly from forgetting that. We begin to believe that our lives are isolated stories. My success, my failure, my problems, my future, my possessions, my identity. But step back, and the boundaries become less clear. The food you eat connects you to the soil. The air you breathe connects you to forests and oceans. The light reaching your face began its journey from the sun. The elements within your body were created through processes far older than humanity itself. You are not separate from the universe. You are made from it. And for a brief moment, the universe has become conscious enough to look back at itself through you. That thought does not need to become a religious belief. It can simply be an invitation to humility. You are small, but you are not meaningless. You are temporary, but your existence is connected to something ancient. You are one person within an enormous pattern, and perhaps that is enough. So when you look at a flower tomorrow, do not only ask, "What is its name?" Ask, "What relationships made this possible?" Sunlight, water, soil, pollinators, time, evolution, chance, environment, countless interactions coming together to create one moment of beauty. The flower is not an isolated object. It is an event, a meeting point of countless forces. And perhaps your life is the same. You are the meeting point of countless moments. Every person who loved you, every person who challenged you, every place you have lived, every mistake, every lesson, every choice, every moment of courage, every moment of fear, all of it has contributed to the person sitting here, listening to these words. You are still changing. The pattern is still being drawn. And that means your story is not finished. Now, I want to do something different. For the next few minutes, don't just listen to me, participate. This is a simple practice. You don't need to believe in sacred geometry. You don't need to understand mathematics. You don't need any spiritual experience. You only need your attention. And if you're listening while driving or doing something that requires your full attention, please save this exercise for later. When you have a quiet moment, go outside. Find something from nature, a leaf, a flower, a tree, a stone, a shell, a patch of grass. It doesn't need to be beautiful. In fact, choose something ordinary, something you would normally walk past without noticing. Sit somewhere comfortable, put your phone away, and for the next 5 minutes, do nothing except observe. Don't photograph it, don't search for it, don't try to identify its species, don't turn it into content. Just be with it, take a slow breath, and begin. Look at its overall shape. What is the first thing you notice? Don't judge your answer, simply notice. Now, look at the edges. Are they straight, curved, broken, smooth, irregular? Look at the surface. Is it rough, soft, dry, wet? Does it contain lines, dots, spirals, repeating patterns? Take your time. There is nowhere else you need to be. Now, look more closely. Find one pattern. Maybe it is a spiral, maybe a branching structure, maybe symmetry, maybe something completely different. Follow that pattern with your eyes. Where does it begin? Where does it change? Where does it disappear? Now look for an imperfection, a tear, a crack, a broken edge, a discolored area, something that doesn't look perfectly balanced. Don't ignore it. Look at it carefully. Notice how the imperfection has become part of the whole. The leaf does not need to be perfect to be alive. The tree does not need perfectly straight branches to grow. The stone does not need a flawless surface to be beautiful. Let that thought remain with you. Now, look at the object as a whole again. Notice how many different parts had to come together for this one thing to exist. Sunlight, water, soil, air, time. Countless invisible processes, countless relationships, and yet you are looking at one simple object. Take another slow breath. Now ask yourself quietly, what am I not noticing in my own life? Don't force an answer. Just let the question exist. Maybe something comes to mind immediately. Maybe it doesn't. Both are okay. Now, bring your attention back to yourself. Think about one pattern in your life that keeps repeating. It could be something small. Maybe you always postpone something important. Maybe you constantly compare yourself with others. Maybe you react with anger before understanding. Maybe you keep returning to the same kind of relationship. Maybe you spend too much time worrying about things you cannot control. Or perhaps your repeating pattern is something positive. Maybe you show kindness. Maybe you keep learning. Maybe you always help people when they need you. Maybe you continue even when life becomes difficult. Whatever comes to mind, don't judge it. Just observe it. Like you observe the leaf. Like you observe the tree. Like you observe the flower. Ask yourself, is this pattern helping me grow? Pause. Then ask, what would happen if I changed one small part of it? Not everything, just one small part. If you normally react immediately, perhaps pause for one breath. If you normally reach for your phone when you're uncomfortable, perhaps sit with the feeling for 1 minute. If you normally criticize yourself after making a mistake, perhaps speak to yourself as you would speak to a close friend. You don't need to transform your life today. Nature doesn't work that way. A tree doesn't become a forest overnight. A river doesn't carve a canyon in one afternoon. Change happens through repetition. One small action, followed by another and another. So choose one small pattern and choose one small change. Remember it, not as a promise of perfection, but as an experiment. For the next 7 days, observe what happens. Now, take one final breath. Slowly breathe in and slowly breathe out. Look at the natural object in front of you one more time. You may notice something you didn't see 5 minutes ago. Maybe the light has changed. Maybe your eyes have adjusted. Maybe the object itself hasn't changed at all. Perhaps you have. That is the purpose of this practice. We didn't change the flower. We didn't change the tree. We didn't change the stone. We changed the quality of our attention. And when our attention changes, our experience changes. You can return to this practice whenever life becomes too noisy. 5 minutes, one natural object, no phone, no explanation, just observation. And if you do this regularly, you may discover something unexpected. The world doesn't necessarily become quieter. You simply become better at finding quiet within it. And perhaps that is where the real journey begins. Not in discovering some secret shape hidden inside the universe, but in discovering how differently you can experience the universe when you finally slow down enough to see it. Chapter 6. The Practice of Seeing. We have spent so much time talking about patterns that now I want you to stop thinking about them. For a moment, forget the Fibonacci sequence. Forget the golden ratio. Forget sacred symbols. Forget everything you have heard about geometry and simply look. Because knowledge can tell you what something is, but attention can show you what it feels like to experience it. Think about the last time you watched a sunset. Perhaps you took a photograph. Maybe you sent it to someone. Maybe you posted it, and there is nothing wrong with that. But after the photograph was taken, did you keep looking? Or did the moment become another piece of content? This is one of the strange contradictions of modern life. We have more ways to record beauty than ever before, yet sometimes we have less time to experience it. We capture the moment and miss the moment. We document the journey and forget to take the journey. We photograph the meal and barely taste it. We record the concert and watch the concert through a screen. We stand beneath the stars and immediately reach for the phone. Perhaps sacred geometry offers us another way of seeing, not a way of collecting beautiful images, but a way of becoming present enough to notice beauty without needing to possess it. The next time you see a flower, do not immediately ask whether it follows a mathematical pattern. First, notice its color, then its texture, then the way light touches it. Notice the imperfections, the damaged edge, the tiny insect, the movement of the petals in the wind. Then step back and see the whole. This is how nature asks to be seen, not as an object, but as a process. The flower is opening, the cloud is moving, the river is flowing, the tree is growing. Nothing is frozen, everything is becoming, and perhaps we are too. Maybe we have spent too much of our lives asking, "Who am I?" as though the answer should remain fixed forever. But perhaps a better question is, who am I becoming? That question leaves room for change. It leaves room for mistakes. It leaves room for growth. It leaves room for mystery. Because you are not a finished object. You are a living process, just like the patterns we have been exploring. Now, let's return to the practice. If you can, close your eyes. You don't need to sit in a particular way. You don't need to become perfectly still. Just become comfortable. Take a slow breath in and let it go. Again, breathe in and slowly release. Now notice the sounds around you. Perhaps there is traffic outside. Perhaps a refrigerator is humming. Perhaps someone is moving in another room. Do not try to remove the sounds. Let them exist. Silence does not mean the absence of sound. Sometimes, silence means the absence of resistance. You do not have to fight the world to find peace within it. Listen and breathe. Now notice your body, your shoulders, your hands, your face. Notice where you are holding tension. You do not need to force it away. Simply notice. Then ask yourself quietly, what am I carrying that I no longer need? Do not search for an immediate answer. Let the question remain open. Maybe something appears, a responsibility, a fear, a memory, a relationship, an expectation, or perhaps nothing appears at all. That's okay. You are not trying to solve your entire life in 5 minutes. You are simply creating space. Space to notice, space to breathe, space to exist without performing. And when you are ready, bring your attention back to your breath, in and out. Now imagine yourself standing beneath a vast night sky. Above you, thousands of stars, each one unimaginably distant. Some of the light reaching your eyes tonight began its journey long before you were born. Perhaps before your grandparents were born. Perhaps before human beings even knew how to measure the universe. And yet, that ancient light reaches you now. For one brief moment, you are looking at something incredibly old, from your very temporary place in time. Let that perspective settle. Whatever problem is occupying your mind today, it matters. Your emotions matter. Your responsibilities matter. But you are also part of something vastly larger. Sometimes we need both truths. The problem in front of us and the universe behind us. The immediate and the infinite. The personal and the cosmic. Holding both can make the heart a little lighter. There is one final pattern I want you to notice. It is the pattern of attention itself. What you repeatedly look at begins to shape what you see. If you constantly look for problems, the world begins to appear full of problems. If you constantly look for reasons to be afraid, the world begins to feel threatening. If you constantly compare yourself, you will always find someone who appears to have more. But if you begin looking for patterns, you start noticing patterns. If you begin looking for beauty, you discover beauty in places you previously ignored. If you begin looking for moments of kindness, you realize kindness was happening around you all along. This does not mean ignoring suffering. It means refusing to let suffering become the only thing you can see. Attention is a form of participation. Where you place it, you place a part of your life. So ask yourself, what am I giving my attention to every day? Because whatever receives your attention repeatedly receives a portion of your life. And life is not an unlimited resource. You can replace money, you can replace possessions, you can replace many opportunities, but you cannot replace yesterday. You cannot purchase another hour. You cannot return to the moment you ignored. This is why learning to see matters, because seeing is not passive. To truly see something, you must give it your attention. And attention is one of the purest forms of presence. Perhaps this is what ancient people understood when they looked at the stars for hours. They were not simply studying the sky. They were allowing themselves to be changed by what they saw. The vastness made them humble. The order made them curious. The darkness made the stars visible. And maybe we need darkness too. Not literal darkness, but periods when we stop filling every empty space. Moments when we stop consuming information. Moments when we stop asking the world to entertain us. Moments when we allow ourselves to simply exist. Because when everything becomes quiet, the things that truly matter become easier to hear. Your conscience, your intuition, your unanswered questions, your gratitude, your fears, your hopes, and perhaps your sense of wonder. That is why silence and sacred geometry belong together. One teaches us to observe the patterns outside. The other teaches us to notice the patterns within. So, what should you take away from this journey? Perhaps not a formula, not a secret code, not an answer that explains everything. Instead, take curiosity. The next time you see a spiral, pause. The next time you see a tree, look at its branches. The next time it snows, notice the symmetry. The next time you walk beside a river, watch how it moves. And the next time you feel overwhelmed, remember that you are also part of nature. You are allowed to slow down. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to release what no longer serves you. You are allowed to begin again. Nature does not demand perfection. It continues. A seed becomes a plant becomes a flower becomes a seed. The cycle continues. A river changes its course. A forest grows. A mountain erodes. Stars are born. Stars disappear. Nothing remains exactly as it was. And yet, there is continuity. There is a pattern. There is relationship. Perhaps that is what sacred geometry can ultimately teach us. Not that every shape contains a hidden, supernatural message. Not that mathematics proves one particular spiritual belief, but that reality contains extraordinary patterns worth noticing. And when we learn to notice them, we may begin noticing something else, our own place within the pattern. You are not separate from the natural world. You are not an observer standing outside the universe. You are inside it, made from it, shaped by it, dependent upon it. And for a short moment in cosmic time, you have the ability to look back and wonder. That may be one of the greatest gifts of being alive. To know that you are temporary and still find beauty. To know that you cannot understand everything and still remain curious. To know that life changes constantly and still choose to love it. So perhaps, the next time you look at a flower, don't rush past it. Give it a moment. Look closely, because hidden inside something so ordinary, you may discover something extraordinary. Not because the flower contains a secret waiting to be decoded, but because you finally gave yourself enough time to truly see it. And now, we return to where we began. The forest, the quiet morning, the first light moving through the trees. Nothing has changed. The patterns were always there. The spirals were always there. The symmetry was always there. The stars were always there. The question was never whether nature was speaking. The question was whether we were quiet enough to listen. Final chapter, the pattern we belong to. Think back to the beginning of this journey. We started with a simple question. Why do so many patterns appear throughout nature? Why do spirals emerge in shells, flowers, storms, and galaxies? Why do branches divide in trees, rivers, lungs, and blood vessels? Why does symmetry appear in snowflakes? Why do simple rules sometimes produce astonishing complexity? We explored mathematics, we explored biology, we explored ancient philosophy, and we explored the human desire to find meaning in the world around us. But perhaps the most important discovery was not a shape, it was a way of seeing. Because once you begin looking carefully, the world becomes difficult to describe as ordinary. A leaf is no longer simply a leaf. It is the result of sunlight, water, soil, genetics, evolution, time, and countless interactions. A river is not simply water moving across land. It is gravity, geology, climate, erosion, and time working together. A snowflake is not simply frozen water. It is a tiny record of the conditions it encountered while falling through the atmosphere. And you are not simply a person moving through a random sequence of days. You are also the result of countless relationships, people, places, choices, memories, mistakes, moments of courage, moments of fear. Every experience has left some mark. Some marks are visible, others are hidden, but they are part of your pattern. And the beautiful thing is, the pattern is still being created. You are still becoming. That means the story is not finished. No matter how long you have lived, no matter how many mistakes you have made, no matter how far you think you have wandered, there is always another moment, another breath, another choice, another beginning. Nature does not ask the seed whether it has failed because it has not become a tree yet. It simply grows. Perhaps we can learn to treat ourselves with the same patience. There is something else I want you to remember. Sacred geometry is not a magic formula for life. It does not explain every mystery. A beautiful pattern does not automatically prove a spiritual claim. And nature does not become less miraculous simply because science can explain how a pattern forms. In fact, understanding the process can make the wonder even deeper. Knowing why a snowflake develops six-fold symmetry does not make the snowflake less beautiful. Knowing how a tree transports water does not make the tree less extraordinary. Knowing how stars form does not make the night sky less profound. Understanding something does not always destroy mystery. Sometimes it creates a deeper kind of wonder. The more we discover, the more questions appear. And perhaps that is exactly how it should be. Because wonder does not require ignorance. It requires humility. The humility to say, I don't know everything, the curiosity to keep asking, and the patience to keep looking. Maybe this is what we can carry forward from the idea of sacred geometry. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not superstition, but attention. Not the belief that every pattern hides a secret message, but the willingness to recognize that the universe is far more intricate than our everyday experience suggests. You do not have to turn every flower into a spiritual symbol. Sometimes a flower can simply be a flower, and still you can stand before it in wonder. You can appreciate the mathematics, the biology, the evolution, the color, the form, the fragility, the fact that something so delicate exists at all. Maybe that is enough. Perhaps the sacred is not something added to nature. Perhaps the sacred is the feeling we experience when we finally pay attention to what is already there. A quiet moment, a sunrise, a child's laughter, a forest after rain, the sound of waves, a star-filled sky, the feeling of being alive. These moments do not need to prove anything. They only need to be experienced. So, when this video ends, don't immediately rush to the next one. Give yourself a moment. Look around you. Maybe there is a window nearby. Maybe you can see a tree. Maybe there is a patch of sunlight on the wall. Maybe you can hear birds, or rain, or the distant sound of people moving through their lives. Choose one thing and simply observe it. For 60 seconds, give it your full attention. No phone, no photograph, no analysis, just presence. Look for a pattern, a curve, a repetition, a contrast, a small imperfection. Notice how light touches it. Notice how it changes. And then ask yourself, how long has this been here without me noticing? That question can be surprisingly powerful, because the world does not suddenly become more beautiful when we pay attention. We simply become more capable of seeing its beauty. And perhaps that is the real practice. Not finding sacred geometry everywhere, but becoming someone who looks closely enough to notice what is already there. Take this practice into your everyday life. When you eat, taste your food. When you walk, feel your steps. When someone speaks, listen before preparing your response. When you see a sunset, stay for the whole sunset. When you are with someone you love, be there. Not mentally somewhere else, not inside your phone, not trapped inside tomorrow. Here. Because life is constantly unfolding in front of us, and it does not wait for us to finish recording it. The moment passes, then another comes, then another, like waves, like seasons, like spirals, always moving, always changing, never exactly repeating. And maybe that is the most beautiful pattern of all. We began this journey by asking whether nature has a hidden language. Perhaps the answer is not as mysterious as we imagined. Maybe the language is mathematics. Maybe it is physics. Maybe it is evolution. Maybe it is simply the consequence of simple rules unfolding over immense periods of time. Or perhaps, for those who see the world through a spiritual lens, these patterns can also inspire a deeper sense of connection and meaning. We don't have to force one answer. We can leave room for mystery. Because sometimes, the most beautiful thing we can say is, I don't know, but I am willing to keep looking. So the next time you see a spiral in a shell, a pattern in a flower, branches reaching toward the sky, or stars scattered across the darkness, pause, take a breath, and remember, you are looking at the same universe that has been unfolding for billions of years. The same elements that formed distant stars became part of planets, became part of living things, and eventually became part of you. You are not outside this story, you are inside it. For one brief moment, the universe is experiencing itself through your eyes. So look closely, stay curious, and don't be so busy trying to understand life that you forget to experience it. Thank you for joining me on this journey. This is Spiritual Walk, and until we meet again, slow down, look closer, and remember, there is more beauty around you than you may have noticed.